Episode 3 of The Pod Couple.
Yes, the third and final episode. Potentially. Who knows?
Series finale. Right here. I'm your host, Kyle Gherkin, and also your host,
Steve Hubbs. That's me.
Sitting across from me. Yeah, we do apologize for last week's podcast. We can probably apologize for it on a number of levels, but specifically we want to apologize for the audio quality, which was quite low and sounded like we were podcasting from the bottom of a well, which we were. But we did put the lotion in the basket, and so Buffalo Bill let us out, and we are in new digs today, which is a Monday. We're recording this podcast from what we will call Studio G.
It's an exotic locale. Very happy to be here. It's going to be interesting to see how this changes the energy of the podcast, if this environment gives shape to something different.
Absolutely. Well, we should get going because we got a lot to talk about on this episode. And I think we're going to start with some TV talk, as we are wont to do. You know, we've been talking a lot about the legal system over the last couple of weeks with, People versus OJ and Making a Murder. And so we wanted to kind of do a little something different this time. And we're going to talk some Better Call Saul, a story about a lawyer. Damn it, we can't seem to get away from it. Yeah, the law is everywhere, apparently. But we do want to talk about Better Call Saul because it is a fun show that is now just starting its second season. The one episode out so far, and the second one is tonight, which I will look forward to. But anyway, Better Call Saul. So Steve, what do you think so far as we embark on this new season?
Well, I love this show. I think it's one of the best from last year. Was excited about it from the get-go. I think this first episode back is a great example of what this show does really well. It's funny because it seems like not a whole lot happens. There's not a ton of action to necessarily move the storyline further, but with just the little bit that they give you, I mean, I could watch this show. I could watch Slippin' Jimmy do his little cons like week in and week out, and that would probably be enough for me. But it's interesting because you never know for sure what they are giving you and what's going to come back, and I love that universe that the show exists in. What'd you think as far as the season premiere goes?
Yeah, I think what you said is very accurate about the fact that it doesn't really matter that much what happens in a given episode because, for starters, it's just so much fun to spend time with these characters, with of course, Jimmy McGill / Saul Goodman, with Mike Ehrmantraut, and some of the other characters they developed too are fun, and that's a big part of this show. That's typically the appeal of sitcoms is like, oh, you want to hang out with these people, but I really feel that way about this show too, which is, I mean, a dramedy for sure, although
but very funny.
Yeah, but not a sitcom, and definitely has dramatic elements. There's no question, even though it airs more towards comedy than Breaking Bad, which was of course the predecessor to this show. I also love all the little details that they have, and I think that's one of the things that sets it apart.
Yeah, it really does feel like it exists in its own universe, in a fully realized world.
Right.
The tequila that they ended up getting, for example, the fact that the stockbroker character was from Breaking Bad.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, remember the guy that Walter White, he uses like the windshield squeegee
in
that episode and sets that car on fire? Same guy.
That's awesome.
I know.
Yeah.
And so it is one of those things that and that's what I wonder about the show in terms of maybe people not getting turned onto it right away, is if they're not as well studied in the world of Breaking Bad or even in the last season, because I'm sure there are things in that episode that I missed by that. There were references that were made that maybe because I didn't watch the first season of Better Call Saul right before this aired again, maybe I missed some important stuff, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think... to me, I think part of the beauty of the show is that it doesn't rely on Breaking Bad in that way. I feel like it really does stand alone. Like, I feel like if I had never seen one episode of Breaking Bad and I watched the show, I would still love it.
Yeah, for sure. It does seem... I guess it does seem to reward you if you are in the know and all those little in-jokes, but it definitely stands alone.
Yeah. But the little character details are so fun, like the fact that Jimmy McGill uses a plastic bag as his waterproof cell phone case, which is
It just goes to show like his working class genius. This
yeah,
like low level, low maintenance level of genius that this guy has.
right. It says so much about the character, that one little thing, and that's something that I think could easily have been. This could easily be something that you don't pay attention to as a writer, but just that one little detail, it adds this whole another layer to the character, or it underlines so many of the traits of the character. That those are kind of beautiful touches. Another one that I felt was the same thing, that again just told you so much about who Jimmy is when he leaves the message for, I'm sorry, what's her name? What's the character? Kim, yeah. He leaves a message for Kim to try to come, back to the hotel and get her to involved in another short con, and then he has to call back to make sure he clarifies that when he spoke of himself as a lioness, that there was a legitimate reason for it, and it wasn't simply a misstatement. And that was, and again, that's the kind of stuff that makes you love these characters.
It's a great example of the wit and charm of the show, and how much thought that they put into all of this. You can tell it's really handled with love. I mean, even if you look at the episode is called Switch, so we have that working on the level of the actual light switch that he references, or the air conditioning switch, whatever, when he walks into the office and he sort of, it says do not turn off, and then he immediately turns it off. It's the first thing that he'll do.
And that's coming back to pay off at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And then you have like this switch of him switching over, from his con man career to presumably going to work for this new law firm at the end. But is he really switching from his con man ways? Or is he just going to pull off some con when he's at that law firm? Pretty interesting to see how it pans out. And I like the switch as a juxtaposition to, that opening scene.
Yeah.
Which I love because I want to see more. I know that this is a prequel, but I'm really interested in Saul Goodman post Breaking Bad as well. And I like that they covered that, at least to a small degree. And I look forward to seeing more of that, hopefully.
Yeah, I think Vince Gilligan established in Breaking Bad that he's the best in the business when it comes to cold opens. I don't think anybody had more awesome cold opens than Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul has somewhat followed in that tradition, and this was a really good one. I think this one worked. It worked as its own, obviously, little capsule story, but it also, I think, to me, what I felt like it was doing was stating that this is what the theme of the whole season is going to be, is about identity and the loss or gaining of an identity, which they really, that final push in on the wall with his initials carved, SG was here, I think spoke to that in such a strong way that it's like really setting the table for the whole season. I would guess. I mean, without having seen the rest of the season.
Could be they just want to get more of that Cinnabon advertising money.
I bet Cinnabon is, I wonder what's happening if they're actually getting paid, because you remember the fact that he's working at Cinnabon, that was sort of a throwaway line in Breaking Bad when he was talking to Walter White, and he's like I don't know, you'll end up as a Cinnabon manager in Kansas or something, and it was just again, I think it was I don't think at the time they were thinking ahead of actually filming inside a Cinnabon franchise in a mall, but that's something they decided to run with, and I wonder if as a result of that, if they are, Cinnabon is paying them, or if it's just they're just letting them use all their corporate logos and stuff for free because they want to be associated with a cool show or what. I don't know. It's probably not too important, but it did cross my mind. So I don't know. We probably don't need to talk too much more about this show. Do you have any?
Just excited to see it moving forward. Always love how even when you have your Mikes and you have your Saul Goodman type characters, I love when they can just flesh out and make these newer characters with the appeal. The play a drug dealer guy with the Hummer and the matching shoes. I mean, that guy's automatically awesome. Like already, like what a goofy. And it exists in such like a goofy way, but it's totally believable because people are goofballs, and I feel like it's an honest portrayal rather of that kind of guy. So just looking forward to it. Moving on.
My last little random thought here with regards to Better Call Saul is, we had Michael McKean, of course, show up in the first season as Jimmy's brother Chuck, who was a major character in the first season. I don't know. I assume he'll play a role going forward. And then we have Ed Begley Jr. showing up as the head of this other law firm. And I'm wondering if there's any Christopher Guest universe crossover going on.
Probably.
Here. Like, is Fred Willard going to show up at some point? I really feel like
I would hope so.
He would fit in good in the show, don't you?
Yeah,
think?
he would be great.
So, yeah. So we can cross our fingers for a Fred Willard appearance later on.
I always do. I hope he shows up on every show.
Yeah, I hope he shows up at my house. Just randomly. Hasn't happened yet, but we'll see. All right. Well, that's Better Call Saul, another big show. HBO's next big budget show debuted last week. It's called Vinyl, and it's brought to you by basically the team that brought Boardwalk Empire, Martin Scorsese and Terrence Winter, with help from Mick Jagger, who's joined as an executive producer and music supervisor and all that stuff. So it's basically set in the world of rock music, record executives in the 1970s, and 73 to be exact, at least in the pilot episode. But now there's actually been 2 episodes. The second episode aired last night. I started watching last night with the full intention of watching both episodes. However, I did not realize the first episode was 2 hours long when I started it late at night, so I ended up only watching the pilot. Have you seen?
We're actually in the same boat.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, I same thing happened to me, man. Just started watching that pilot, looked down, and was like, "What the hell? Yeah. Come on, you gotta warn a guy."
I paused 10 minutes in, and I was like, "What? An hour and 50 minutes left."
So what are your initial impressions on the pilot episode?
Well,
plenty of opportunity to form an opinion on a 2-hour pilot. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously the show is a very big budget show, and it feels very much like prestige television, and very much like HBO prestige television. You've got some big name actors. You've got extremely high production values. Martin Scorsese directs this episode, and
his oily Italian thumbprints are all over it.
Yes, we'll now be getting a lot of hate mail from the Italian community.
Oh, I'm Italian, so I can say that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay, then.
That's
Good.
all right. I'm also any other thing that I offend.
Yeah.
I am also a black lesbian.
Well, I can vouch for that. I'm sitting across from right now, and I've never seen a more black lesbian in my life. So, yeah, but anyway, so it's got all that, it's got all those elements. A lot goes on in this episode, but yet, I at the end of the day, I'm reminded of a quote from the Bard about being full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. It feels like an empty experience in a way that I don't think it should after 2 hours of these characters and these situations.
Yeah, that's pretty acutely put. I would say that it sounds like maybe my experience mirrors your own. It did seem like a lot of investment of my time for something that I honestly wasn't all that interested in. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's so very Scorsese, and he's pulling out a lot of the same tricks, and even to the point where once Bobby Cannavale, is that how you say it?
Yeah, Bobby Cannavale, yeah.
Yeah, oh, he's great, by the way.
Yeah.
But once he starts narrating the story, I was like, Jesus Christ, are you kidding me? Do we need another narrator for another Scorsese project? Like, just let the story tell itself. I'll figure it out. I don't need this guy talking to me directly.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, it was great in Goodfellas, but you don't have to do it in every single movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's funny you say that because, again, we don't talk about any of these shows before we go on the podcast. We literally...
No, and in fact, you were saying before, sorry to cut you off, but we were talking before the podcast about how you had sort of been avoiding other podcasts and reviews because you didn't want to necessarily have your opinion informed by that. So it's funny that you brought that up prior to this going on air, because I actually, based on my reaction with the People versus O.J. Simpson and seeing all of the positive reviews, I didn't read anything about Vinyl or anything going into it this week. I flew in completely blind, and it seems like here we are on the same page again.
Yeah, Maybe we should find podcasting partners that have more contrasting views. Well, that's.
I mean, who would have thought a white man and a black lesbian would see eye to eye so readily?
Yeah, it's really uncanny, but well, we'll have time to disagree about something later in the podcast. It's a little preview coming up, but as far as this show goes, yeah, I haven't looked at anything, and it is funny you said about Scorsese and seeing all his moves, because in my notes I literally wrote down Scorsese playing the hits, because it's like, yeah, it's like, hey, like,
oh, it's like a music thing,
right? Exactly.
Nice.
So you see what I did there.
Yeah.
But I mean, it really does feel like it's like all the old Scorsese moves with the voiceover and then cutting to the action it's explaining, and then doing the different camera moves, and we've got to have a body that we bring in a trunk and dump somewhere.
Yeah, the trunk and the body thing, right, for sure.
And
let's go
the tough guy cliches.
Super ham with the metaphor of the building falling on a dude.
Right.
As his world crumbles because of addiction, it's like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that was the end of the end of Shutter Island, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and like I said, all the tough guy cliches, particularly with Dice Clay and his performance, and it just, yeah, I was like, I've seen all this a lot of times before, and so I don't know if that's part of it. It's just that I have seen all this so much that it isn't compelling to me at this point. If I'd never seen a Martin Scorsese movie, it probably would have been a lot more interesting to me.
Yeah, I wonder if it was compelling to him. I mean, this almost seems like journeyman-esque for him to just sort of, he's like, this is what I do, I'm retreading the same territory, and I can pop this bad boy out in a couple of days because I know all these moves, And I know these chords.
And to be fair, I mean, Martin Scorsese is a supremely talented filmmaker, and even when he's going through the motions...
he was great in A Shark's Tale.
Yeah, it was probably the pinnacle of his acting career. That actually may be true. But yeah, but as far as it goes, I mean...
Pinnacle acting career is probably Taxi Driver, though. He's great in Taxi Driver.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as the
that
guy who wants
little
to
scene.
Voyeuristic.
Mm-hmm.
Is he trying to watch his wife? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I need to revisit Taxi Driver. Maybe if we do a Martin Scorsese director series.
Well, I already saw what he can do. I just watched 2 hours of it.
Yeah. I'm not saying anytime soon.
The thing is again, it's kind of like this People vs. OJ thing. It's not bad.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, Scorsese has more talent in his little pinky than most directors will ever have in their entire lives, but when you've seen it so many times and it doesn't feel like there's anything new there, it feels like you said retreading the same ground.
Yeah, just putting Goodfellas with a music background to it.
Yeah. But speaking of the music, one thing that did strike me is, what was the music budget on this thing? I mean, my God, it'd have to be... I mean, they're playing a song about every 10 seconds a new song comes in, and most of these songs are well-known, popular songs. I mean, did they spend $1 million on music just in this pilot? More? I mean, I don't know. It seemed...
however much the music budget was, and I know you've had your experiences working with your own film, kind of getting around that. I know that's a lot of hurdles to jump over, but however much they spent on music, I'm guessing America spent more on earplugs because of how poorly balanced the music is for this show. I had to drastically change the volume on my television between the dialogue driven scenes, and anytime some music would come in, I thought that my neighbors are gonna murder me. Like, they're just gonna kill me. It was so, the sound mix was so, I don't know if you had this experience, but for me it was way off.
Yeah, I did, and for me it was not worrying about the neighbors as much as worrying about waking up the baby, but yeah, same kind of situation where every time it would crank up, I was immediately hitting the volume down to avoid my 1-year-old son waking up in his crib 3 rooms away.
That said, if you're a hardcore music history fan or music nerd, this show's got to be a bit of a wet dream for you. Because there's a lot to dig into. That's
one thing I was going to ask you about, because of course, you are more the music guy of the two of us. No question about that. And I'm not, I'm not a big music guy, period. Certainly not hugely aware of all the music of the 70s, and this show, I'm wondering if it works a lot more for someone who has those interests or is a really
It's neat. It's definitely neat. It's cool to see like Bo Diddley being referenced as one of the originators. You know, that's the where he gets the guitar. So you have that. You see the New York Dolls kind of being featured at the beginning, and it's kind of neat to look up and be like, oh, that's the New York Dolls that they're doing. So that's fun. But then at a certain point, you are you're bound to alienate some people, I think, that are serious music fans, because when you have this guy coming along playing Robert Plant, then everyone that knows Led Zeppelin is gonna look and listen to that guy and be like, that's not Robert Plant at all, man. This is a travesty. Like, people take that really seriously. And a lot of the times too, I'm watching a thing and I'm trying to figure out if this is just an artist I don't know or if it's some amalgam of a couple of different artists. And so then I kind of get caught up in the mentality of, is this a real guy that I haven't, and I haven't brushed up on my history enough, or are they just completely making this up? I mean, the Little Jimmy Johnson, what was his name?
Little Jimmy Little.
Little Jimmy Little, that was it. Yeah, that's way better than Johnson. So Little Jimmy Little, like, could be very specifically based on a particular dude, or he could just be some, made up for the show type of thing, and I couldn't tell you. So it's almost distracting, but if I was a little more knowledgeable, I think that it would definitely be more fun.
Let's talk a little bit about the performances. I know you mentioned Cannavale, and I think he's always an interesting performer, everything I've seen him in, so this is no exception.
Yeah, I've loved him since The Station Agent.
Okay. Yeah. He appeared in Boardwalk Empire, had a fairly big arc, and I can't remember which season, but anyway.
Yeah, that's one I never saw, actually.
Oh, really?
All of the television I've watched, but I haven't seen Boardwalk. One of these days, I'll get around to it.
I mean, it's not on the absolute top shelf, but it's definitely worth watching. Certainly better than a lot of the stuff you've watched.
Yeah, that's got to be true.
And anyway, but as far as other performances I liked in it, I thought Juno Temple was good.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with her work outside of this, but she definitely captures that sort of pervy side of me. Like, she looks a little too young to be attractive, you know what I mean? Which I think they're kind of going for, because she's kind of, got that innocent look, but she's gonna get grimy with all the other dudes in this show.
She has a little bit of a Jennifer Lawrence thing going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but she I thought was interesting. I also thought Ray Romano was good in it, and he is surprisingly good at drama. He is also in Parenthood, which is another show that I'm sort of surprised that he is as good as he is at doing the drama side of things. So,
yeah, that's my only side story from Vinyl. That was my favorite kind of just little trivia, is that apparently Romano auditioned for this show, and Scorsese didn't know who he was and had never seen an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond, and didn't know it was like one of the biggest sitcoms, of its time.
That's hilarious.
So Ray Romano, essentially a household name. Scorsese's never heard of him.
That's funny. Well, I guess Scorsese's too busy figuring out where to bury the next body to stop and watch a couple episodes of Everyone Loves Raymond. So
it'd be interesting to see a Scorsese car commercial with just constantly shots of bodies in trunks, and then it's like Subaru. That's it.
When you need to dump a body, a lot of trunk space in a Subaru. Even if it's a fat guy like Andrew Dice Clay.
I thought Clay was great.
You did, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, okay. Well, finally we have a point of difference here.
I thought I brought a little life into it.
Yeah, I felt like he was so over the top, and I know that's the character, but I don't know. It felt like he was trying too hard for me, and I was just and it was such a cliche with the big talking tough guy, and I was just like, I don't know. I kind of halfway through I was tuned out, and I was just wanting the scene to end, and of course. Yeah,
I mean, I don't disagree that he's chewing the scenery, but sometimes I like it. I'm a longtime Pacino fan. He's a big scenery chewer, so if you commit to it, I think it could be pretty effective. And I liked him, although I'm glad they killed the character, because if he had been in every episode of the show, I think, yeah, it would have been a little bit too much.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. There was a fun moment when they think he's dead and they're planning what to do with the body.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he's back to life,
right.
like Frankenstein's monster,
yeah.
which they foregrounded pretty heavily. Yeah, so that was, anyway, I don't know. Overall, like I said, there's definitely interesting stuff going on. There are some good performances, but it's definitely not the sum is greater than the parts kind of situation.
Definitely be interested to see where they go for the second episode. Right. How they're going to address the building collapsing on this guy. It'd be funny to see them just not address it at all.
So, do you feel like that's a legitimate thing that happened? That was not a dream sequence or some kind of cocaine fueled?
Yeah, it seems like they played it straight. I mean, I thought for sure when it was going down and sort of he almost has this sixth sense about it. You can see he's seeing the environment and everything's starting to shake apart. And obviously with the lines, the actual cracks in the building looks pretty fake, could easily be a dream sequence. But it seems like they played it off like that actually happened to this dude.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt very much, from the beginning of the sequence, when it starts, he snorts the cocaine, and then the head goes back, the eyes close. So you could definitely be going into some kind of cocaine fueled dream at that point. But the very next thing that happens is he has a phone, and he's making a phone call from his car. But it's not. First off, I don't think car phones existed in any form in 1973. I could be wrong, but also it doesn't even look like a car phone. It's like just a standard rotary phone.
Yeah.
And where's the cable coming from? It's not clear at all. So that's the first thing that made me think, okay, now he's dreaming, because it was such a weird, surreal thing to have like just a rotary phone in the car, and then the way the whole thing shook out with the people running over the car, and everything felt very weird. It didn't feel real. It felt surreal. So I just assumed it was a dream sequence the whole time, and then especially as it started proceeding, they loop back at the end, of course, and you said the building starts breaking apart, and even the way the building's breaking apart feels completely unrealistic. Not to mention, like, how could he survive an entire building collapsing on him? None of it made sense. So even though they don't cut to him waking up or anything at the end of the episode, so it's not 100% clear as a dream sequence. I just don't see how it could otherwise be. And if it's not, then I almost really don't like the show, because that just seems stupid.
Yeah, my impression is that they are playing it straight. They could go the other way, but even if they're not, even if I'm wrong and it is going to be some dream sequence, like, I'm not particularly thrilled with it one way or the other.
Yeah.
I just think it's sort of a clumsy way to handle the whole thing and to try to wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't love it as a dream sequence, but I love it way less if it's supposed to be reality. So, but yeah, I had the same question. This is the only thing that kind of makes me want to come back for episode 2, is to see what the plan is for the season, because in a lot of ways it felt like a self-contained, like could have been almost a self-contained movie, setting aside the ambiguous ending. There's a lot of things that are set up and paid off in the episode. So I was kind of like, well, what's the plan? What's the arc for the season? It's definitely not clear by the end of the first episode where they're going with it or what they want to do.
What do you think of Olivia Wilde?
Well, I don't think she was given much to do. She pretty much got the classic wet blanket spouse role so far. So hopefully they're planning to make more use of her going forward, because that would be sort of a tragedy if she's relegated to such a throwaway role. But yeah, there wasn't much for her in the pilot, in my opinion.
The spitting of the booze back into the face, though, I feel like that's a small thing, but it says a lot about the kind of lady she is. Wet blanket though she may be, I felt like that was a pretty nice touch. But other than that, yeah, I agree with you.
Any parting thoughts on Vinyl before we move on?
It could get really good. It definitely has room to save itself. So I don't know that it will, and I'm worried that with this and OJ, this year is shaping up to be some sort of highly critically anticipated stuff that's just not going to pan out. So hopefully that's not the case. I mean, they already renewed it for season 2, so they got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, they definitely have the budget to do some interesting things. So, I mean, it's HBO is apparently just shitting gold bricks. I don't know how they're able to finance such elaborate things from Game of Thrones on down, but I'm a fan of it. I'm glad that somebody's out there putting up this kind of money to do these incredibly lavish cinematic television shows. So, more power to HBO for that. All right, so moving away from TV.
But before we do, real quick shout out to Broad City. Season 3 is back now. Have you seen Broad City yet?
I have not. It's on the list.
Yeah, definitely check it out. They came back with a vengeance this week. Definitely check that out if you get the chance. And also, The Magicians is quickly becoming the show I look forward to the most, seeing week to week. It's about 5 episodes deep now. I like to call it Sweary Potter, because it's basically Harry Potter with swearing. So,
well, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah.
All right.
Moving on.
Couple quick recommendations from Steve. Quick hits. So moving on to the world of politics here. We just had on the Democratic side, just had the Nevada caucuses. Hillary Clinton came out ahead there.
Well, depends on if you look at it factually or philosophically.
Yeah. Well, that's probably going to be something that a theme that crops up throughout this segment, but as far as factually versus philosophically here. But anyway, Hillary, as the race is shaping up, Hillary does have pole position at this point, but certainly Bernie Sanders is doing far, far better than anyone predicted 6 months ago. And it's a much closer race than anyone would have predicted back then. So we wanted to do a little segment here. I mean, Steve and I, as you've probably gathered, if you've listened to the podcast, the first 2 episodes,
or met us, talked to us for like 30 seconds,
you've probably gathered we're fairly liberal guys. We're definitely of Democratic sympathies, but for this particular race, for the primary race, I'm a supporter of Hillary. He's a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and so we thought it would be fun to do a little Bernie versus Hillary debate.
Well, Kyle says fun. I thought it would be terrifying, since he's basically going to school me. This is Kyle's chance to just throttle me in a political discussion. But, you got to indulge. When the guy is the guy that brings the recording equipment for the podcast, you kind of got to let him have his fun.
I'm glad you feel that way. So we wanted to do that, and of course, in our typical fashion, we did zero planning, so we don't really have a structure for this. But what I was thinking is that maybe we could each start with a fairly concise 2-3 minute case for our candidate, and then we could interrogate each other from there.
No, I can make it way more concise than 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, Hillary Clinton is, first of all, let's just get it out of the way. If Bernie doesn't get the nod, then I'm just going to be voting for Clinton. There's no 2 ways about it. And I think that if in some way Bernie actually gets the nomination, you'll probably end up voting for him.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's not even a question. But that being said, Hillary Clinton is an establishment shill, and she should be dragged out into the street and beaten with a progressive stick. I just think that essentially the basic case for Bernie is probably reminiscent of whatever rhetoric, whatever groundswell his campaign has had amongst the younger people. They're tired of sort of the same old politics, and I think that's a pretty strong argument. And this is definitely a different field of candidates we've seen even make it this far in the election than I've ever witnessed. And we have a chance this year to do something really different, or at least to try and do something really different. So that's my case for Bernie.
Okay.
Just concisely put.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, I appreciate you keeping your case for Bernie concise. I will do my best to stay
concise, uninformed, however you want to say it.
Yeah, there's different ways to look at it. I suppose.
Factual, philosophical.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to stay under 3 minutes with my case for Hillary, but here it goes. So I like Bernie Sanders. I think that Bernie Sanders, I really like his ideas.
I win the argument.
Yeah,
I got it.
Game over.
Woo! That was concise.
That was easy. So yes, I like his ideas. I like the things he's talking about, that he's taking on these moneyed interests, and that's all very exciting to a liberal guy like me. But the thing for me, when it comes down to, is what is the job that he's running for?
President.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the President of the United States specifically.
Oh.
And so the question is that he's not, if the job he was running for, if I was voting for him to give speeches, if I was voting for him to be a guy that sits down at dinner with me and talks politics, like, I would definitely vote for Bernie Sanders. But for President of the United States, I don't think that he's the best candidate, and that Hillary Clinton, to actually be the president of the United States is where I feel like that she's much more qualified on a number of levels. And it's not just for that job, but the fact that it's specifically president of the United States in 2016, which is, or I guess it'll technically be 2017 when they get sworn in, but anyway, which the reality of that world, the reality of the circumstances that the president will come into, is that we're going to have a divided government with hyper partisanship. You've still got the geography and gerrymandering favoring the Republicans, so you're going to have a Republican majority in the House and most likely the Senate. You've got Republican, governorships that are in the majority, state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans. So all the way down, the president is going to be opposed on every single item of their agenda, just as Obama has been through the majority of his presidency. That's the reality. That's the circumstances that the president's going to be stepping into. So if that's Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton stepping into those circumstances, I think she is the one that I want doing that. And I mean, obviously she's got, tremendous bona fides. I mean, she was the first lady, as we know, had a front row seat for that job and how it's done and all the ins and outs of it. That was not an intended euphemism there. But she's obviously seen the legislative side as a senator. She's and she has the executive experience as Secretary of State. With that, with being an executive and being over a large bureaucratic organization. And the bottom line is, with all that experience, she gets in a really tough spot where she's like, man, like, really, this is such a tough decision, and so few people have ever been in this position. As a president of the United States, I wish I could just talk to someone who had been there before. Oh yeah, I can just roll over in bed and ask my husband, Bill Clinton.
You just roll over in bed and say, "Hey, where's my husband?"
Well, if he's there, he's going to be there sometimes anyway, and he'll, that's so. And the bottom line for her, is going into that situation, going into that hyper-partisan situation where she's going to be opposed on everything. This is something that Hillary Clinton is very accustomed to. I mean, she has basically her entire career has taken unending shit from the Republicans. I mean, just unmatched vitriol and hatred that they've directed at her. And so she's not going to be under any illusions that she can work with these people. She's going to know that if you're going to get things done, it's going to be about knowing where the levers of power are, knowing how to work the system, knowing how to work the loopholes, knowing how to do all the insider things that you have to do to get things done in that kind of situation. And, Bernie Sanders is not going to be in any different boat, but except I think he has much less knowledge of where those levers of power lie. And so, that's kind of that's kind of the end of it, is that at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton, I feel like, is very much the outsider versus insider thing. They say, oh, she's an insider, he's an outsider. That's what the appeal is for a lot of liberals. But like, the job of the president is inherently the ultimate insider. Like, so it's not like for a person who wants to be the mouthpiece of a revolution, the president is exactly the wrong job for that person, as far as I'm concerned. It's tough because when they're out there on the campaign trail, and I'm sure I'm way over 3 minutes at this point, but
I'm taking it all in, buddy.
I'm
Keep on going.
gonna keep going for a little bit longer, then you can have your chance to hit me up. But basically, when out there on the campaign trail, Bernie Sanders he's able to give to give these speeches and give this fiery rhetoric and talk about taking down these banks and doing all this stuff, and it's very exciting, and it's the kind of rhetoric that pumps you up. If you, especially, if you're a liberal, if you have those sympathies, like that's what gets you inspired. He's selling hope for a different future, hope for a big way of changing things. I mean, it's very similar in many ways to what Obama did in 2008, hope and change, right? I mean, he's not using the same slogan, but it's the same idea behind it. But as we saw when Obama got in office, that's not realistic. That's not something that can actually happen. The system is not set up to allow for that. And so, Bernie Sanders, while that's very exciting, it's very inspiring, it's not like, what are the odds that any of those things are going to be able to come to pass? I think that you have to look at it with a realistic eye, not what you hope for, but what's actually going to happen. And in those circumstances, Hillary Clinton is saying, look, we're going to make small incremental gains. And it's tough for her because I think she's being very honest in that regard, and she's being very, very much a student of political realism. But that's not inspiring, and that's one of her biggest problems, is that she's not selling something that people want to buy, particularly Democratic voters writ large. It's hard to get fired up and rah about, like, hey, we're going to make some small incremental changes that over time will accumulate and make minor improvements in people's lives. Yeah, like, all right, but whereas this idea of, oh, well, we're going to come in, we're going to make these sweeping changes, and we're going to remake society, and we're going to have a political revolution, like, that's much more easy to get behind. But is that what we should be making our decision based on? Should we be making it based on ideologies which, at the end of the day, are more likely to be comforting fantasies than the hard truth? So that's kind of where I come down on the whole thing at the end of it. So, and that's why I'm a Hillary Clinton supporter.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I definitely expected that when we were planning on having this discussion. We sort of loosely talked about that it was going to come down to my idealism versus your pragmatism, and that seems to be, where our loyalties lie. And I get what you're saying. I guess I would counter with, if it's to be assumed that either one gets into office and then faces contention from the Republican side, do you want someone that is already saying we're not going to be able to make big changes, we have to be realistic? Or given that both people are going to have to give ground, why don't you want to elect the person that wants to take the most ground, so that when they do cede that ground, they're not ceding as much?
Well, I think that if you actually look at the policies that they're proposing, there's not that much difference between them.
True.
So you say they take the most ground, but really, Hillary Clinton, yeah, maybe some of her policies don't go quite as far as Bernie Sanders in terms of Wall Street regulation, but it's not like she's saying, oh, let's let Wall Street have a field day. I mean, she has very specific ideas, some of them which actually do go farther than Bernie Sanders in some ways, about how to attack it. Now, whether you think she will follow through with that when she's in office, or whether she'll be beholden to Wall Street interests, which of course is the argument that Bernie Sanders and some of his supporters are making, but is a different matter. But if you just look at the plans, her plans really are not that different from his in terms of the goals and what they ultimately want to achieve. And they go farther in some other respects with regards to remaking the criminal justice system, with regards to gun control, things like that, than some of his plans do. So I think to me, it's not about what do they actually ultimately want, because I think what they ultimately want are very similar things. It's who knows how to get there, or who knows how to get as close as possible to that ideal. And I think that she clearly has the experience and the knowledge of Washington and how it works, how the game is played, to be able to advance that agenda as much as is possible to advance it. Could Bernie Sanders learn that? Could he learn how to play that game? Could he hire the right people? Maybe. Will he be ready for that on day one? I don't think so. And I know she will be. So, and I don't want to waste any time with these things. If it takes him 4 years to figure it out, which in some ways I think happened with Obama to a certain degree. I mean, I wouldn't say it took him 4 years, but it definitely took him a while to realize what was
Well, it's a rude awakening.
The limits possible.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. And Obama was also someone who didn't have a tremendous amount of experience going in, had just been a senator like Bernie Sanders. Now, Sanders has been a senator for much longer than him, but being a senator is a much different job than being the president. Being one of a body of 100 and not necessarily, particularly being someone who represents a very unrepresentative state, is just a completely different situation. And so, so again, I would be hopeful if he does get elected. I hope he's a fast learner, and I hope he hires the right people and surrounds himself with the right people and is able to figure out the best way to advance his agenda. But I don't have the confidence that he'll get there, or he'll get there fast enough that I do have in Clinton. So
a solid point. Definitely, Clinton seems like, again, the more pragmatic choice. I'm just a little bit worried that she's not going to actually know. I just feel like she would give in a lot more readily if she gets the office than Sanders. And that's not, that's just speculation, of course, on my part. But I got to vote for somebody.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to vote for somebody.
Oh, speaking of which, today's the last day to register if you're in Arizona. And so probably by the time you hear this podcast, if you haven't registered in Arizona, it's too late.
Yes,
but
I'm sure that will be the case.
Heads up.
Yeah, but you really should have registered a long time ago. So shame on you for not doing so if you're just now listening to the podcast and realizing you're not registered. I'm guessing you don't give that much of a shit about politics, if that's the
maybe
case.
they're just waiting for us to have this discussion, Kyle.
Yeah, they wanted to make sure that there was somebody who was worth voting for before they registered. That makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ideas to explore here. Let me actually ask you a couple questions about Bernie Sanders. Then, one of the things that he has been banking on, as a candidate, one of the things he's spoken about a number of times is this idea of a political revolution, and that there's the idea that there's a silent majority out there of people who are very frustrated with politics and big money in politics as it is, and they've sat on the sidelines because they haven't had a candidate who was willing to take on big money and Wall Street and whatnot in the way Bernie Sanders is. And so when those people turn out, that's what's going to turn the political system on its head. So, but if that's truly going to happen, then why is turnout down significantly in the primaries versus 2008? If Bernie Sanders is the person they've been waiting for, where are they?
Oh, they're just still waiting, man. They're very patient. No, a good question, man. I think that does probably speak to the disillusionment of the modern voter, and it probably is going to take some time for people to wake up and actually identify with Sanders. I think sure, like, he's got a lot of millennial backing, but a lot of other people, people my parents' age, people my age probably, just don't know that much about him. He's not getting nearly the media coverage that, say, someone like Trump is getting, and they're essentially running on they're running on similar ideas, which is that people are sick of establishment candidates. I mean, they're both outsider candidates, but you get way more coverage from Trump than you're getting at Sanders at this point. I think a lot of people just look at him and go, well, that's an old dude, and then dismiss him out of hand.
Well, let me propose an alternate theory, which is that the people who are really fired up by that idea, the political revolutionaries in waiting, so to speak, are the kind of people who were already engaged in politics and are already we're going to come out and vote for Democratic candidates. And so therefore, again, the preaching to the choir, so to speak, preaching to the liberal wing of the party, which were already politically engaged, because that's what the turnout numbers seem to indicate, that's what's happened. And that, the idea that there's this huge swath of people who've just been waiting for a Bernie Sanders-like candidate and to get engaged in the process, I think that seems at this point to be wishful thinking. Like, it's a fun idea, and I wish it was true, but, like, so I understand that I can sympathize with that wishful thinking, but the numbers haven't backed it up so far.
Well, numbers, man. Numbers are just math, And what good does that have?
Just silly old math.
I hated math.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of math either, so maybe I shouldn't be putting so much stock in it. But so that's one question I have. Another question, you just alluded to it earlier. which is 74 years old too old to be starting your first term as president?
I mean, probably, but what am I going to do? Thing is, like, okay, so 74, yeah, pretty old, especially if you're going with the mindset that the first 4 years are going to be a pretty steep learning curve. So sure, I agree with that. And probably you could make the argument that the whole case for Bernie Sanders is wishful thinking, not just on his part, but on the part of guys like me. That's black lesbian men.
I feel like you're really making my case for me here.
Well, buddy, it doesn't have to be a knockdown, drag-out brawl. I will say this: he's 6 years older than Hillary Clinton. She's not that young. He's 5 years older than Donald Trump. He's not that young. Right. These guys read a lot younger in the media than Sanders does.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, in my own opinion, Hillary Clinton is right on the borderline of what I would consider to be an acceptable age for a candidate.
What if she decides she hates the presidency and wants to have babies? She's a woman, Kyle. Did you even take that into consideration?
I didn't. That's a good point. I mean, I don't want to be accused of being ageist, but I do think that there are certain jobs that it's reasonable to wonder if the rigors of the job are acceptable for someone advancing into their late 70s. I mean, if you were 74 years old and you were trying out to be a fireman, I don't think we would be considered ageist if we said, well, this job might be too much for you. And the president being president is an incredibly rigorous job. And it's not, I mean, if you look at every president who's held the job, so you look at their picture the day they were inaugurated.
Yeah, Obama's a great example.
Yeah, and then the picture when they leave office,
Christmas,
and
that guy.
the amount that they age in that period because of the stresses and everything that the job puts on you, and even physically, while it's certainly not on the level of being a fireman or something, all the travel and all the different weird hours you have to keep and constantly going from place to place. I mean, that's a taxing thing, and so I don't think it's outrageous to consider somebody's health and their age especially when it's in that range, which is, quite frankly, I mean, you're getting up into what is a life expectancy for an average human being type of range.
Yeah, but look how angry Bernie gets, man. That's how you know he's got plenty of vim and vigor. And he's better shot on the basketball court than I am.
Not
saying much.
The highest of bars to clear. But
that was a slam dunk.
Yeah. Well, you do have a mean reverse layup, so I haven't seen Bernie do that. But yeah, and again, I'm not saying, I mean, Bernie Sanders does seem to be very vital for a 74-year-old. Certainly, I'll be happy to be as vital.
There's that qualifier. It's funny, it's a double-edged sword, though, because if you got a younger person that was up for the candidacy, they'd say they don't have enough experience. They're too young to know the ways of the world and the ins and outs of politics and all that stuff. So.
There's probably a happy medium there, though, is what I'm saying. And I don't know what it is, 55, whatever, but there's a huge difference between 55 and 75.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure, anyone who has grandparents, you've seen your grandparents age, and probably when you came into the world, they were around 55, and you've seen them age past 75 or even 85 even into death or whatever it is, and
my grandma's 185 years old. It looks great. Looks great for that age.
Yeah, she really pulls off a bikini still, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Call back.
Nice.
So, yeah, but you know what I mean. And so then mentally, your faculties wane. I mean, my mental faculties have waned from 25 to 35. Yeah. So it's. Anyway, I think it's a legitimate concern, and it's not just legitimate concern for me, but also a legitimate concern in a general election, because that the Republicans are certainly not going to be pulling any punches when it comes to attacking Sanders on the question of age, if he was indeed the candidate.
True, but again, 5 years away from Trump, I'm really scared because 2016 has already murdered a bunch of people. So it's like we could lose somebody on the trail to the White House before we even get there.
That's true.
I wouldn't be surprised. 2016, not pulling any punches.
That's true. You Father Time undefeated as of yet.
So are there any stances in which you think Sanders and Clinton differ enough for you to come down on the side of Clinton as far as being based in the issues? Or is this simply a matter of her being the right person, the issues be damned.
I don't think, to me, the issues are secondary, definitely, with them, because, as I spoke of earlier, I think they're much closer than people imagine. I do think there's some areas where Sanders or where Clinton's a little more progressive than Sanders. I mean, gun control is probably the most obvious one.
Yeah.
Also immigration, for sure. I mean, Sanders has definitely taken a nationalist line at times, not completely, non-Trumpian line on immigration. It's certainly a much less racist line than Trump, but the idea that
well, that's where he really shows his age. He's like an old man that just wants to be left alone.
Yeah, I mean, there's a protectionism idea that he adheres to, which I think is part of his protecting the American worker sort of idea, but doesn't necessarily gel with modern day economics, and that's really, I think, another issue for me with Bernie in particular, is that when you look at the specifics, when you start getting into the details and you start looking at the specifics, a lot of his stuff doesn't hold up, and it makes me wonder, how serious of a person is he, or the people who are running his campaign or whatever, how serious are they at knowing these issues and knowing the details, which again is what matters once you get in there.
Give me a for instance.
For the broad strokes philosophical points, it may not matter, but once you're actually tasked with governing, which is again the job that he's actually applying for, is these matter. And so so a really good for instance for me, one that was startling when I saw it was his campaign put out this plan, because of course single payers is one of his big platform ideas, is we need to basically scrap the current Obamacare system, and we should move to a straight single payer like Canada, Denmark, Great Britain, basically most other first world countries. Okay, so that's cool, but then how are we going to pay for it? It's obviously that's an expensive proposition.
Yeah, just tax the rich, dude.
Right. Well, that's the Bernie Sanders method. So is that we're going to tax the rich, we're going to raise this much money, and this is how we're going to pay for it. This is how much the plan is going to cost, right? And you put out the details. Well, when those details were looked at by so there was this economist who is a left-leaning economist. This isn't somebody from a Fox News think tank or anything, who looks at it and he says ultimately that the plan is going to cost twice as much as what Sanders people are saying. And it's like, okay, so when we dig into the details, how does that work out? And one of the places where Sanders is saying we're going to have all this savings is that they're negotiate with the drug companies. That's something that a lot of other countries do, is they do these hardline negotiations, say we're only going to pay you this much for the drugs, and so that's how we'll establish drug prices. And so they said, well, so just by negotiating with drug companies, we're going to realize $320 billion in savings, right? So that's cool. All right, so $324 billion savings. Well, it turns out that Americans only spend $305 billion on prescription drugs in a given year. So apparently Sanders' team is going to negotiate so hard that
Was that Americans or is that just Rush Limbaugh?
Apparently it's just his OxyContin budget. Yeah. No, they're going to negotiate so hard that the pharmaceutical companies are actually going to be paying us $20 billion to take the drugs. So that's something where you say, okay, so when that was pointed out to his team, they, some journalist called him up and said, do you have a comment on this? They said, well, all right, so it's not going to be $324 billion. It'll be $260 billion in savings and whatever, which is still seems wildly optimistic, and there doesn't seem to be any realistic path to achieve those kinds of savings. But it also just the fact that that number was even in there to start with, and that they kind of, when they were challenged on it, they just sort of pulled another number out of their ass, says to me that these are not people who are really serious about figuring out ways to accomplish these things as much as they just want to tell people what they want to hear. And I can understand it, because I want to hear that too. When I hear, we're going to negotiate with the drug companies and we're going to save this much money, I say, great. But that's and I think that's the trap for liberals with this is that if you look at the other side of the coin, you look at Republicans, and so much of their rhetoric is completely fantastical, and this idea that they're appealing to somehow recreating some fake idealistic leave it to beavers 1950s America where whatever, everything's great and perfect, and it's laughable. You look at it and you say, well, they're just being silly. But the fact of the matter is, the reason it's appealing is because that's what those people really want, and so that's what they want to hear, and that's why it works. And I think that as liberals, we had to be careful not to fall into the same trap on the other side, where when someone's just telling us what we want to hear and telling us about the world that we hope for,
sure,
that we don't stop being critical.
But Sanders at least is pointing to models that already exist, even if he's not have the numbers right. If he's pointing to saying like Canada, like Denmark, these things are in existence. The Republican narrative is pointing to what, like this country, what it used to be.
Sure, yeah, and that's
so it's a little less pie in the sky.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say give it a complete equivalency by any means, but you see what I'm saying about there. It's easy to fall into an ideological trap if that is the ideology that you subscribe to, And I think that's.
But isn't it easy to be jaded about the process, too, and just say, look, in reality, we're not going to get anything big done because all politicians are liars?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's easy to be jaded in that way, I think, but to some degree there's jaded and then there is realistic, and there's a fine line between those two things. But you talk about being able to get big things done, and I think that's part of it too. Some people will say, well, if we can't get big things done, I don't even care, right? So that's why I'm going for Bernie. That's the go big or go home kind of idea.
Sure.
Which I think is very dangerous because, again, putting any Republican in office, I think the dangers are quite clear. And so, but even beyond that, I don't think that's fair because, yes, you're not going to have these sweeping revolutionary changes necessarily, but you still, the incremental changes have a lot more to recommend them than people give credit for, I think. And it's easy to be impatient, especially, if a system seems unfair, or if you in particular have been treated fairly by a system, or there's things that seem like they should be common sense and they haven't changed for decades or whatever. So I understand that frustration and that impatience, and it's easy to have. But by the same token, you look at Obama, and I think Obama shows us the triumph of incrementalism. If you look at the Obama's administration, I was frustrated the first few years. It was like, God, they're not going to get anything done, like all these campaign promises, whatever. But now if you 7 years in, if you look back over the record and you realize that all these little gains add up, there's an accumulation here. Obviously you just start running down the list. I mean, universal health care is something that Democrats have been trying to pass for 100 years, ever since Teddy Roosevelt, and Obama got it passed. There was a rescue of the financial system by Obama, which, again, like how much of the stuff you want to give him credit for, you can make arguments about that, and whether all these things were perfect, but that was certainly, we were on the edge of possibly catastrophic ruin. Pulled back from that. The stimulus bill that passed, got us out of the recession. Within that bill, there were a lot of things tucked in that bill that people don't talk about, like, for instance, a $94 billion moonshot for clean energy, which is a huge priority for liberals. I mean, you got the auto industry rescue, which was in there, which saved a lot of jobs, for Democratic people. We've got establishment of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is huge. Just put 2 women on the Supreme Court, including one who's Hispanic. That same court that legalized gay marriage. You're talking about winding down 2 wars. He didn't start any new wars, which that's a big one. Very easily could have started multiple new wars, and certainly Republicans in Congress were clamoring for at least a couple of wars along the way here, killing Osama bin Laden and lots of other high-profile terrorists, which a lot of people don't think about. The drone program. There's been a lot of other high-profile terrorists which have been killed by them. The unemployment is below 5%. Huge additions of new jobs, the Paris Accords on climate change, normalized relations with Cuba after 54 years. I mean, on and on and on. You can talk about these accomplishments, and this is what happens when it's a slog.
Gay marriage? Did you say gay marriage?
I did, yeah. I said
I'm super gay for gay marriage.
Yeah,
I want to hear
it makes sense
once.
as a black lesbian.
Yeah.
Of course, you would be big
Exactly.
for gay marriage. Yeah, but so I mean, so again, this is what incrementalism achieves over a period of years, and I think that Clinton can definitely be the heir to this legacy and continue to move it forward.
Right, but all of this stuff was done by a senator with no experience as Secretary of State.
Yeah, right. But I think when you look at Obama's,
And he ran on that rhetoric.
When you look at, he did, absolutely. But if you look at Obama's personality at its core, and this is something that was addressed even back when he was running, he's sort of a technocratic core and a pragmatist at his core. And I think he's much more in his philosophical outlook closer to a Hillary Clinton, again, as that sort of pragmatic, technocratic steward than Bernie Sanders, who was more of a true political revolutionary. At least that's my reading of it.
Yeah, that's probably right.
So, all right. Well...
so basically, you're voting for Bernie. I changed your mind.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know
how this shakes out.
I don't know what I was thinking. So
I've reawakened the dreamer in Kyle Gherkin.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. I will say there's maybe one last question I'll ask about this, and we can move on.
Hit me with it.
Which is this idea of a revolution, political revolution. First off, maybe it's a two-part question. One is that even a good thing? Is our country in such shambles that a political revolution is something that we should even want? I mean, are there problems in the country? Of course. Are there some serious problems? Of course. Have there always been in the entire history of the United States? Yes. But, revolution, and of course, not that they're literally talking about pitchforks in the streets or anything, but it's bandied about in a way that might be a little cavalier. I mean, you talk about the American system in many ways, I feel like, is resistant to revolution, and that's a feature, not a bug, because the kinds of places where it's easy to have revolution are like banana republics that are held by a strong man or something. And so that's certainly not the model I want. And I think that if you really start talking about revolutions and tearing down institutions, the idea that they're somehow just going to be replaced with better versions right away is again, I think, completely unrealistic. And ultimately, you're talking about more like anarchy, and anarchy, I feel like whatever problems we have with our system, and again, they are numerous, the problems of anarchy are always worse.
I mean, for a short time, but it'll level out eventually.
Yeah, it always ends up working out in the end. We certainly...
If you were so anti-revolution, Kyle, then what about the Revolutionary War, which founded this country?
I think that was arguably a mistake.
England agrees with you.
Yeah. So anyway,
I just think that's rhetoric, though, man. Obviously, like you said, they're not calling for pitchforks in the streets. I think it's more a revolution about moneyed politics, as you stated earlier.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing, and you just need to whip people up into a frenzy to even get them to show up and vote. I mean, that's basically, we've become such a sensationalist nation and culture that this is the way you have to talk to get anything done at all, to get anybody's attention.
Yeah.
I just think it's a bunch of, it's just rhetoric.
Sure. Yeah, and I understand that, and appealing to people's frustrations, people's fears is always the quickest way to get a reaction, as we've seen. But again, that's the part of it that feels a little bit frustrating to me to see. The Republicans have had that playbook for years, and if you listen to a Republican debate or their stump speeches, I mean, you would think that America was literally on the edge of ruin, and that it was basically, one step away from Nazi Germany or something, that it's such a horrific hellscape that we find ourselves in. And yet, when you look around and you actually look at the numbers and the historical context, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing okay.
Yeah. We as in middle class white dudes.
Well, but even overall, I mean, yeah, obviously there some people are doing better than others, as has again, always been the case in America. There's not like there was some golden time where everything was magical equality. In fact, I would argue that we've made progress, through the centuries, and as Martin Luther King said, the arc of of history bends towards justice, and I would argue that's something that we're seeing borne out. We currently have a black president, and who would have thought that was possible even 30 years ago or something. So is it perfect? Are there not still serious problems? Of course, but is America, is it completely on the wrong track? Is it really that horrible of a place, again, that we would need some kind of revolutionary change? Or is continuing on this path and continuing to progress with the gains that we've made with, an heir to the Obama legacy like Hillary Clinton, is that not good enough?
I don't know, man. Time will tell.
All right. Well, this has been a fun discussion. So you
did a great job.
Oh, well, you too, sir.
I zoned out for like half of it, but the half I heard.
Well, when you listen to this back later, and probably are the only one listening to it back later, you can let me know how you thought it went. But yeah, so all right, well, let's obviously get out there and vote, whether it's for Hillary or Bernie. Get out there and vote in the primary.
Absolutely.
And then definitely in the general, whoever emerges, we will be supporting the Democrat, whoever that might be.
Yeah.
All right. And with that, we'll pivot to our director series and Boogie Nights. Which is the second Paul Thomas Anderson entry. We did Hard 8 last week.
Don't look for it on Netflix. It's not there.
It is not. The Boogie Nights sadly was pulled from Netflix, but of course there are other ways to find it. And we did, and we watched it. Now...
Not together. Again, we're flying into this blind.
Absolutely. Independent opinions only, even though we seem to always agree.
Right.
So, all right. Well, this movie, I have to say, as I rewatch it here, and I don't not to oversell it, but I really do think that this deserves to be in the conversation of the greatest movies of the last 20 years. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Like up and down. From the very opening shot of the film, it's just so alive. The energy is so suffused with this lived-in energy that just kind of grabs you and doesn't let you go really until the end of the film. And so, I mean, there's so much to talk about. Where do you want to start?
Where do I want to start?
With things to talk about with the film.
Where do I want to start? You were kind of going on a roll there. This movie, I will say, upon revisiting it, I actually think that I saw more flaws than I did the first time. So that's interesting that you. I admit that it is a fantastic movie, for sure. But I was more aware of what I didn't like about it the second time around in some aspects.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, about the idea of, revisiting a film and seeing things you didn't see the first time through or the second time through even perhaps. So some of the positive things I saw that I really enjoyed was, again, the little details, the little touches that are hard to pick up on a first or second time through sometimes. One of which is the character of Little Bill, and
he's going to talk about Little Bill,
played by William H. Macy. And from the very first moment you see him, it's just so clear that he's this sad sack, who the world is he's put upon by the world in every way. The very first time we see him, he goes to the table where Jack is, and this waiter bumps him, and the waiter doesn't even apologize or even acknowledge that he's a worthwhile human being Bill's apologizing to him, even though the waiter bumps into him, and it just sets the tone so quickly. And then the very next scene we see him in, he's arriving at his house, and he goes to put his keys on the little hook by the door, and they fall on the ground. It's like nothing can go right for this guy. Even something as simple as setting his... And that's such a small moment. It's such a small touch, but it tells you everything you need to know about Little Bill. and his
Yeah,
his
that's one
future in the
thing.
film.
Definitely revisiting that character is one thing I noticed going back and watching this movie again. I didn't have as firm of a grasp. It seems so like celebratory, and it is, like you said, suffused with life throughout the movie. But I missed out on how dark this movie actually is, and how dark it gets its comedy from such a dark spot. It minds, and I'm thinking specifically of Little Bill in this instance, because if you just heard this story from like a friend of yours, if it wasn't told to you in this way, it was just, yeah, this guy kept coming home to his wife boning other dudes, and then he murdered her, and then himself. Like, there's nothing inherently funny about that, but they get some real comedy out of it. And I think the funniest part is, you know, after, when we're well into the film and it's in the 80s, that one shot of Little Bill on oil that Buck's wife made,
Yeah.
that painting, and his face is so sad in that painting, but Jack Horner has still hung that in his house as some sort of memorial to his friend. And God, that cracked me up, and it's such a miserable existence for this dude.
Again, little touches. You know, you could miss that. It's not, they don't zoom in on the painting. It just walks past it in his house, and yeah. Definitely the moment of levity for me out of the whole scene, or the highest moment of levity, was the conversation he has with Ricky Jay in the driveway.
Yes, it's so good. He says, he says something about my wife having an ass in her cock.
Yeah,
it's just, it doesn't even make any sense because he's so flustered.
Well, the funniest thing about that is that was actually a flubbed line by William H. Macy
that makes sense.
Yeah, and they decided to keep it, of course.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that Anderson does. I mean, he seems to give actors room. That's where you get all the life from this story, I think. Little moments like that backflip, or that flip that John C. Reilly's character does into the pool and just like lands flush with the surface, and it's very clear that that's supposed to happen because that's in keeping with his character. But I'm wondering like how many takes of that they did where John C. Reilly just had to constantly subject his body to that amount of harm, and how fearless you have to play that role. And it seems like that's what Anderson does. He gives his actors really nice meat to chew on.
Absolutely. I think, you know, one thing to talk about with the script that is so impressive to me watching it this time through, I don't know how many times I've seen it, maybe 3 or 4 times now, is how well it establishes the core of each character the very first time you see them. I mean, within 30 seconds, you know who every character is when they come on screen. And it's almost masterful in how efficient it is at establishing. I mean, some of it is the script, and some of it is the use of the camera or the blocking or whatever, but or how the actors were directed. But there's it's crazy. I mean, they're able to establish so much in such a small amount of time.
And it does so
little.
without diminishing these characters into sort of flat or caricatures. Like, they're all fleshed out human beings, and their personalities are authentic.
In an amazing way for how little screen time so many of them get.
You easily remember Louise Guzman's character from this movie, and he doesn't really do that much.
Is it Guzman or Guzman?
Is it Guzman?
I don't know. I'm honestly like I'm constantly get pronunciations wrong. Yeah. So because I only read them and then someone says the name. But anyway,
it Boogie Nights or Bogey Nights?
I kept waiting for like some like Russian fighter planes to get involved, and I was like, what's this Bogey Nights? But no, well, Luis Guzman, if you're listening, you can let us know at the email whether it's Guzman or Guzman.
Yeah, plus we love you, dude.
Yeah, and you're awesome, and in general, and pretty much everything you show up in, you're always a delight, and this film is no exception. But yeah, another good example I think is the Philip Seymour Hoffman character, who has a very small role really in the film. Doesn't have, hardly any scenes where he's the center of the scene, but you feel like you know him so well, and to the point to when he has that moment in the driveway where he tries to kiss Dirk, and then he's in the car beating himself up, saying like, I'm such a fucking idiot. Like you feel genuinely so bad for him. Of course, some of that's a testament to Hoffman and his ability as an actor and what he's able to generate emotionally. But it's like, that's crazy. That, like, why do I care so much about this character who I've barely even seen?
And why am I so delighted to see Philip Baker Hall show up again, even a super small part where he talks about getting butter in his ass and a lollipop in his mouth.
Don't step on my line. That's my line, buddy. We'll be coming back to that near the end of this segment. But so, for sure. There's and all the way down the line, I mean, there's really, the bench in this movie is so unbelievable. And we talked about Philip Seymour Hoffman, William H. Macy. Both of them have fairly small roles. You got guys like Ricky Jay and Luis Guzman showing up, who are always fun in any movie they show up in. Like you said, Philip Baker Hall pops up for just a small role. I mean, Don Cheadle's in this movie. He's probably has like the 15th most interesting performance in the movie. And he's great. Yeah, that's just how. It's not a knock on Don Cheadle. It's saying that's how good this movie is and how many interesting performances there are.
This is 1997. So that's the last time Heather Graham was in anything good.
Right.
And it's the last time Heather Graham was good in anything.
Right. Yeah. Which that segues in another thing I wanted to talk about, which is performance of people's careers, because Mark Wahlberg. I'm not generally a fan of Mark Wahlberg. I feel like he usually plays Mark Wahlberg in every movie.
Yeah.
Okay. You're on the same
That's
page
fair.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he's actually really good in this. And I mean, to me, I don't feel like there's any question. Certainly of anything I've ever seen, this is his best performance. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know that it's my favorite performance of his, because I'm a sucker for him in The Departed.
Okay.
Going back to Scorsese, just because that role that would have been good. I mean, for anybody, it's such a choice role, and it's a lot less to do. He has a lot more heavy lifting to do here as Diggler, and it's definitely his strongest work.
Heather Graham, as you said, I don't think there's any question this is the role of her career.
Yeah, and not that big of a role. I mean, she does roll a lot, but not many lines. Not given a whole lot of lines, but still, like that moment with her and Julianne Moore on the bed when they're all coked out, and she asks her to be her mom. I mean, that's really powerful.
Yeah, and even just the kind of the fun she has throughout the film, and it's. And whether that's Anderson was able to capture something that's just inherently in her as an actress and bring that to the fore in a way other directors are not being able to do, I don't know. But yeah, she's excellent in this film. Burt Reynolds, obviously a long storied career. I don't think there's any question in my mind that it's certainly his late period, this is his best performance.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think it's in the running for his best performance ever?
Yeah, I mean, probably. It's hard. He has those early iconic roles like Smoking the Bandit and whatnot, but this is definitely more, his most human role that I can think of. Although I haven't seen the original version of The Longest Yard. I only saw the Adam Sandler cinematic masterpiece. So,
well, I think if you just sort of Photoshop Burt Reynolds' head onto Adam Sandler, and you can get the feel for it. So performances, all the way down the line, amazing performances. Definitely, I think career performances from several actors. I don't know. It's even just talk about like again how deep this bench is. You have Alfred Molina showing up like 80% of the way through the film. And he just absolutely murders it. I mean, he kills this scene, like, which I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, and since we're talking about it anyway, and say this is my pick for scene of the movie is the firecracker scene. Yeah. Where they go to this house of this drug dealer played by Alfred Molina, try to sell him some baking powder, and it's Wahlberg and John C. Reilly and Thomas Jane, who also shows up
in the movie, also great.
Yeah, who shows up like halfway through the movie. Yeah. Again, this is how good this movie is.
Nothing.
Guys like Thomas Jane can just pop in, halfway through. But yeah, and they're sitting on the couch as this guy is playing music on his 8-track system that he's very proud of, and doing drugs and basically just kind of being a maniac. But the best part of the scene, the thing that puts it completely over the top, is you have this little Chinese kid in the background just lighting off firecrackers in the house for no fucking reason at all. And it adds this layer of tension that's to a scene that's already ratcheted up to 10 on the tension scale. That's just crazy. So I love this scene. I mean, obviously there's many scenes in the movie could be chosen. There's a million great ones, but this one was the one that stands out in my memory as the scene that went above and beyond everything else from the performances, not just of Melina, who's amazing. And definitely steals it, but even the performances of the three actors and just how tense they are and how scared they are to be there, but they're trying to hide it. And Wahlberg has that moment where he completely zones out, and the camera pushes in on him, and you're just like, and you have no idea what's going on in his head right before, and it holds on him for, I don't know, 10 seconds or something before he finally jumps up and tries to leave. And that's another story I heard, that when they were filming it, Anderson wasn't able to get what he wanted out of Wahlberg there, and so they just kept doing it, and that was like take 80 or something, and so Wahlberg is basically really zoning out at that point. Like he's like so tired from filming that he's just out of.
That was super effective, because I don't know if you've ever been sitting on a drug dealer's couch, like just waiting to get the hell out of somewhere, but that rang super true. I saw Wahlberg doing that. I was like, oh, I have definitely been there. That is authentic.
This is the kind of inside scoop you can only get on the Pod Couple.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's since we're talking about favorite scenes. I don't know. Hopefully I didn't steal yours, but
no, I actually kind of figured it's like you said. There are so many good scenes in. So many scenes that can stand alone, that if you wanted to get someone to watch Boogie Nights, you just show them this one or that one. Because it really is great all the way around. And I kind of had the feeling that you'd pick the drug dealer firecracker scene, because it is pretty iconic. And I did remember it from the first time I watched it. And I also remembered the scene that I chose, which is the donut shop scene with John Cheadle's character. I love how it's sort of... this story dips in and out of different people's lives at different times. There's these competing narratives going on. Sometimes it works out okay for somebody. More often than not, it doesn't. But Cheadle sort of is this plucky optimist. He gets the bad end of the deal and being denied the loan to start his own business and move away from the porn. And then there's just this moment of that Deus Ex.
You're a pornographer, sir.
Yeah.
Stop saying that word.
Yeah, it's not fair. He's so, such a little boy, so wounded. So for this ghost in the machine comes in and drops the money into his lap after he miraculously survives this crazy, only in America kind of donut shop shootout. And I just love how it's sort of, when he's going there picking out the donuts, and he's just really earnest and excited about his kid, and you get he's almost wreathed like the garland from the Christmas decorations, like a halo, before he survives that is some sort of miracle. So that's something I remembered from the first time around, and something I really like too. Also, just getting that visual of all that blood over his all white outfit.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Don Cheadle's outfits throughout the entire film
are amazing.
Are delightful.
His outfits are a character in and of themselves.
Yeah. My question with regards to that scene, which is a great scene as you described effectively, but how was this the most successful donut shop in America? I mean, how much money was in this donut shop that he was able to start his own stereo business? Did they never take money to the bank, and it had just been stockpiling in that safe for an entire year, or what?
Yeah, it was a very successful donut shop. It was probably, they didn't show you that part of it, but being it's P.T. Anderson, they had earlier that day, they were supposed to empty the safe out for the week, but they hadn't. They had somehow built up all of the restaurant's earnings for an entire year, as in a matter of coincidence, and that just happened to be the bag that Don Cheadle got a hold of.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite quote from?
All right. Well, your
favorite line.
You already
kind of blew it.
Kind of blew it a little bit, but we'll say it in its entirety here. This line comes from Philip Baker Hall, who is distributor basically for the porn in the film, and he is trying to convince Jack that the wave of the future is video and moving away from film and theatrical distribution into home video, which of course we from the perspective of the future know is true. But anyway, his line is, I like simple pleasures, like butter in my ass, lollipops in my mouth. That's just me. That's just something I enjoy. Call me crazy, call me a pervert. But there's one little thing I want to do in this life, and that is I want to make $1.01 in this business.
It's such a great line, man.
Delivered much, much, much better by Philip Baker Hall than me. But
yeah,
you get the idea.
Yeah. Philip Baker Hall could read you your own phone number, and he'd do it well. This actually, my line is relevant to that line. It's almost the perfect compliment. This is a line from Jack Horner, who is so resolute in insisting that he's an artist, that he makes films, and then, as you can see, the home video aspect of the pornography is catching up after Dirk leaves. His business suffers a step. He's working with these new kids, and so as he's driving around Heather Graham's character, and he's trying to get someone off the street to have sex with Roller Girl, he says, "We're about to make film history right here on videotape."
Yeah.
And I just think that's the perfect line to sum up Jack's struggle through the movie.
Yeah. I wrote that down as well. That was one of my alternatives if you were to take the butter in the ass line. But yeah, absolutely, I agree. It's a great line, and definitely the way that he delivers it.
Yeah, his delivery way better than mine again.
It's weird that these professional actors,
super high caliber actors,
being directed by Paul Thomas Anderson,
almost like they know what they're doing,
can do better than two guys reading off cue cards in a podcast. I don't know. It's almost not what you would expect. But yeah. So but yeah, definitely the delivery sells that line so well and sums up exactly how he feels and just how depressed he is, what a dark place it is for him that he's been reduced to this Girls Gone Wild style of video production, which is not what he ever wanted to do when he got into this business. And talking about the business and filmmaking, and obviously Jack's character, I really feel like this film as a whole is a love letter to filmmaking.
Interesting.
And if you look at, not just obviously the love and the energy that goes into all the style of this film and the camera moves and all the different pieces, that's like the highest like surface layer. But beyond that, within the film, they use all these different formats. They use video, for instance, when they're shooting that scene that's about being on video, and then they use a documentary format to encapsulate a portion of Dirk's life and also to give you the first sort of sense of his break with Jack, or his future break with Jack. They use the format of the film itself when they're showing you some of the scenes from the porns they make, like the way that they, particularly the hilarious scenes from the series, what's the name of the? I'm blanking on it.
Chest
Rockwell and Brock Landers.
Brock Landers.
Yeah, Brock Landers is the Dirk character, and Chest Rockwell is the John C. Reilly version in this series that they make.
Those are some great names.
So another great line, the way that he's cracking up when he says it.
Yeah.
But so you've got all these different formats that are being used, and then just obviously the way Jack's character is about it, and then the way he talks about filmmaking, the way that they show these tight close-ups of the reels of film moving through the camera, focusing on the mechanical aspects of it, on the blocking of the scene, all these different pieces. I think underlining that, yeah, pornography might be a really low-rent form of filmmaking, but it's still filmmaking, and it still involves all the same pieces that pretty much any film involves, and that's something that if you are a filmmaker, I think you have to love all those pieces, because otherwise you wouldn't be a filmmaker, because it's way too hard. And so if you don't have a love for that, and clearly PTA does, and that comes through in this film. And then the last layer that I think is that this film so much boils down to at the end, well, at the beginning, that like how it shows how all these characters don't really fit into the world. They've been rejected by, or one way or another, from like the normal world. And the place where they really fit in is in Jack's orbit and making these films and being part of this ensemble or whatever. And as they have that masterful final scene at Jack's house when everyone's kind of back together, the old gang, minus the Colonel, are back together, and that sense of family that they create. This is a family, and that's what, filmmaking is family. I think that's kind of that bottom line. And if you've ever worked on a film, you recognize that that's what it becomes like that. Working this close quarters with people, putting this much passion into something, this much emotion into something, whether it's on a very small scale or a very large scale, whether it's a bad movie or a good movie, you develop a certain family-like bond. And I think that's shown very effectively in this film.
Yeah, that's definitely a sweet notion. That's more sweet than how I saw it, which was after Paul Thomas Anderson, rather, after being sort of soured with his experience and dealing with the studios with Hard 8, and how, they made him rename the project, and he had to re-edit it and recut it a handful of times before they could get on the same page. I sort of saw this as a takedown of Hollywood and the film industry in general. I like your view. Your view is a little more Sanders, mine a little more Clinton.
Well, turnabout is fair play, my friend. So I also like the structure of the movie. I think that's another brilliant piece of the script, is the way that it's structured. And obviously you have the very clear three acts: the rise, the fall, and then kind of the redemption. And the way that they're able to structure them around these parties. You have that first pool party at Jack's house. You have the New Year's Eve party, which is a clear turning point. And then that final, it's not really a party, but it has a party-like vibe, that final shoot, in the last scene. And I also noticed this time that there was like a mirror motif, which runs through the movie. And it's at similar points, like to sort of almost break up the structure, the acts in the structure.
So like when he can't get his dick up in the middle,
right,
and at the end, obviously the last shot, and then prior to that,
early on, he's looking in the mirror in his room and he's doing his karate moves, and he's just still like a aspiring dreamer,
I didn't notice that at the time of viewing it,
tables.
But it's totally right there,
So that was another neat thing that I hadn't noticed prior either, but this viewing through was fun to see. I don't know. I mean, again, everything in this film is really good. The editing we haven't talked about at all, but is pretty amazing. The scene that really jumps out to me from an editing standpoint is when he's riding around, when Jack's riding around with Roller Girl, as you described. Meanwhile, Dirk is basically been reduced to...
that was almost my favorite. I almost picked that for my scene, too.
Been reduced to essentially hustling closeted gay men and having them pick him up, and then he jerks off with them jerks off for them.
He's fallen all the way back down to where he was at the beginning when we first meet him.
But at that point it was almost like
it's worse.
It was
because he fell.
Right, exactly. And that was like a kid's way to make some extra bucks, and now it's a desperate drug addict's way to catch his next high or whatever.
Crank it out for crank.
So, but anyway, so they cross-cut these two scenes, which first off are basically the low points of both Jack and Dirk's careers as they've diverged from each other, and then they both end in attacks of one kind or another, which they cross-cut between, and then just to bring it all home in a brilliant final touch, after all that editing, as the truck with the Dirk's assailants goes peeling off, it passes the limo that Jack is in, and then as that passes out of frame, in comes Buck's car heading to the donut shop.
Shades of Magnolia.
Yeah, and it all just falls right together. And we'll see more of that in Magnolia for sure next week. But it's I mean, that's just a level of execution that you have to kind of stand back in awe of.
You really have to, especially when you consider that PTA was 26 when he made that movie.
Oh, that is depressing.
Yeah, it's pretty sad, man. Feels bad.
Well,
feels bad. Good for him, though.
Yeah. So I guess the bottom line is, if you have not seen this movie, do yourself a favor, go out and watch it immediately.
Yeah, see it. Not you don't even have to be a big fan of porn. Not that much. Pretty tame.
Yeah.
All things considered, for a movie that's about pornography and pornographic movies.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily watch it with your grandma.
No, but with my grandma, hey,
Yeah.
she's 185. She's seen some shit. She can handle this.
Yeah, your grandma would watch it with.
Yeah.
But no, I'm just saying in general. But yeah, so you caution yourself that way. But it's a fantastic film, and definitely one to catch. If it's not for the first time, then for the second time, or even the third. So, all right, before we move on to the world of music here, just quickly we'll say that next week we'll be doing the next film in our director series. So again, if you're playing along at home, that's going to be Magnolia. So you can check that out and hear what we have to say about it next week.
When was the last time you saw Magnolia?
I actually saw it not that long ago because Magnolia was part of my inspiration. Some of the a lot of the choices that were made in it were part of my inspiration for 7 Hours in Heaven, which is the feature film that I directed. And particularly, I liked the use of music in Magnolia so much that I rewatched it.
That's something we didn't even talk about with Boogie Nights that much, huh?
Oh, yeah.
But it was great.
Yeah. Yeah,
PTA
excellent.
knows. And not just the songs that he picked for the soundtrack, but the actual score itself.
Right.
Very effective. Oh, that's cool.
But so I liked the way the music was used so well that I wanted to rewatch it just to make notes on that specific part of it and try to incorporate some of that into my film. So anyway, so I have seen it fairly recently, probably about a year ago for that reason.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in like 10 years or something. So,
All right.
Again, that'll be pretty exciting. And again, don't look for it on Netflix. I don't think it's up there. Maybe. But speaking of music, I did want to do a couple of quick things to teach Kyle in our weekly segment more about modern music. And we're going to start with something that's not modern, but you probably learned about modernly in that you just watched Vinyl. Mm-hmm. And so the band that I had brought up earlier in the podcast is the band called the New York Dolls. They were a a lot of people I think conflate like hair metal with glam rock, but they're not actually the same thing. So they were a glam rock band back in the 70s, and their whole shtick was they dressed like ladies, but they were dudes playing like hard rock and roll, good old-fashioned American rock and roll music. And their lead singer is a guy named David Johansen, and I think it's Johansen, but it might be Johansen. It's the J. I don't know if that's a hard J. Yogging, I'm not sure.
This has been Unknown Pronunciation Corner.
Yeah, no shit.
Brought to you by the Pod Couple.
But this guy's pretty cool. He has a song that he has performed with the Dolls as they've reunited and on several occasions over the years. But it's one of my favorites. It's called Funky But Chic, and it's just a great poppy rock song. And that's the whole thing. Is he's got, as a singer, so much attitude and so much charisma. He's really, really easy to like. And he's got this kind of great growly voice, especially now that he's older. But David Johansen actually went on to become Buster Poindexter. That was a character that he played. Yeah, so that hot guy.
Wow.
Same guy from New York Dolls.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and definitely check out 1978's Funky But Chic. On the modern music tip, you want to check out the record Ego Death by the hardest band to search for on the internet, because their name is The Internet. So try Googling The Internet. But The Internet is... Ego Death was released in 2015. It's definitely a modern record in terms of production, but its spirit is that of a soul record. So it's cool. They've got a couple of guest appearances, which are good. But if you're a fan of soul music, this is newer soul music that you could really get into. Listening to the album, it's for fans of The Girl from Ipanema, the Amen Break, Prince, Portishead, Black Lesbians. His lead singer is a black lesbian, much like myself. So if you're fans,
I was waiting for that to pay off.
Of any of that stuff, I've had it in my back pocket. The opening song I caught on Jimmy Kimmel Live a few weeks ago, and I had actually heard it before, and I'm glad that I knew the song, because seeing the live performance of it, just the way that it was mic'd, didn't really grab my attention as much. So you may have thought you've seen or heard of this band, but if you actually listen to the produced version of the song Get Away off of Ego Death by the Internet. It's a great, sexy, breathy, heavy on the bass, real earthy drums, a great jam. That and the 1-2 combo off that album, that's Get Away is the opener, and then the second song, Gabby, which also features Janelle Monáe, who's great. That 1-2 punch, great way to open a record. So I highly suggest it. Kyle, what do you know about books, son?
Well, before I tell you what I know about books, I wanted to prove that I am learning about modern music.
This is great.
By talking about last week's band recommendation, Run the Jewels 2 was the album by I guess Run the Jewels is the name of the rap supergroup. Anyway, and I listened to the album. Once again, found it to be another solid recommendation from Steve. And to prove it, I chose my favorite lyric from the album.
Is it the AK Dick one?
It is not, although that was a good one too. But yeah, this one comes from the song Blockbuster Part 1.
Oh, that's such a great song. That's the song that got me into that album.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I can see why. The lyric in particular is, I Jake the Snake 'em, DDT 'em in mausoleums, macabre massacres killing cunts in my coliseum. Which, anytime you can connect an 80s WWF wrestler to Roman architecture with a through line of mausoleums, macabre massacres, and cunts, you've got me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's some
right
dense lyricism.
Well, I'm glad to see that you're checking it out, man. And I'm even more glad that you're enjoying it. So that's awesome. I haven't read a book since we started doing this podcast yet. So
or for years prior to that.
Yeah, I think I actually forgot how to read between last podcast and this one.
Well, if you want to try to get back into it,
yes,
I have a recommendation for you.
Let's hear it.
And in Kyle reminds Steve that books are still a thing. This week I'm going to recommend Wonder Boys by Michael Chabon.
So if I've seen the movie, does that count?
It does not.
Damn it.
There is a movie, which apparently you have seen, it's Michael Douglas and Tobey Maguire are in it. I'm blanking on the director now.
Van Zandt, right?
Is it Van Zandt?
I don't know. I thought so.
Yeah. Well, in any case, the movie's not bad. I would say you could check that out, but the book is much, much better. One of the things is, again, the movie, it's almost impossible to capture this, is that what happens in the book is not that interesting. I mean, like, the story's fine, but it's like that's not what makes the book good. What makes the book good is the style of the writing. And I don't know if you've ever read anything by Chabon. I'm guessing you have not. But
that's a big no. I shook my head. You can't see that at home, but
yeah.
I was confirming Kyle's suspicion that I'm a dunce.
I don't think there was a lot of confusion on that point by the audience. If they were wondering if you'd watched it or not, I think they probably all had gone along with that assumption. But yeah, as far as the book goes, like I said, the writing style is it's just so funny and witty and aggressive, and like Chabon has a way of just even taking like sentences and making them flow into other sentences that is really hard to describe, but it's just an absolute pleasure to read. And that's, again, it's one of those things that it elevates the material so much. It's like he could write almost anything and it would work if you write it in that way. So, I mean, this book, the basic story is that there's this writer who's a professor. He's basically a pothead, and he's written this book that was really successful. Now he's been working on the follow-up for years and years and years, and he's just kind of keeps writing with the book's meandering and not really going anywhere. And that's the basic conflict is just his life kind of falling apart, and the book is that writ small. But anyway, so it might not sound that interesting to you, but if you're just a fan of intelligent, well executed writing, like that's where to check this thing out. I mean, one of my favorite parts of the book, which is left out of the movie entirely, is there's these long digressive passages where he talks about this other writer who's kind of cloistered up in his rooms, where he just sits at a typewriter and churns out these H.P. Lovecraftian existential horror stories that nobody reads, and it's like totally tangential to the main plot of the book, but it's so fun and it's just so interesting the way that he weaves that in. And so anyway,
I'm always interested in stuff like that where it's writing about writing or films about films. It seems like our interests intersect, and that sort of like meta kind of commentary. Things like that are always fascinating to me.
For sure. And I think, my guess is that this came from a place of a lot of familiarity to Michael Chabon as a writer. I think he had a big success out of the gate with a book called The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is also very good. And I could recommend if you want a twofer, but I think he then struggled to write after that a follow-up, and I think Wonder Boys is ultimately what came out of that. But Wonder Boys is my favorite of the Chabon books I've read. I've read several, and they're all good, but Wonder Boys is the one I would go to if you want to start.
Wait, is that the guy that wrote Summerland?
No, I don't think so.
No.
But
what's the other book that he wrote that's not Cavalier and Clay?
Telegraph Avenue is one. Is that...
No.
I
don't know books, man.
Yeah. So
is that the guy that wrote Don Quixote?
Yeah, I think he wrote Hamlet or something. So anyway, check it out. Wonder Boys by Michael Chabon. And with that, I think we can wrap it up for the week.
Yeah, what's the big takeaway from this week, Kyle? What do you think?
The big takeaway is probably that until next week, we will be just hanging out with butter in our asses and lollipops in our mouth.
Oh, it's not the other way around.
Signing off.
I've done this whole podcast wrong.
No wonder you were so unclear with your diction. Signing off. This is the Pod Couple.